just so small.
Where it just jettisoned.
Hey there, this is the Small Stuff Podcast. My name is Kyle Roebuck. This is the intro. Let's start the show. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Small Stuff Podcast. Before we jump in, make sure you're following the podcast on all of the social media platforms that you can think of that we're on. Instagram, Facebook, TikTok. I really think it's just those three. I don't know why I act like there's so many. Everything's in the description for everything. That's it. Okay, we're in. How you doing, Terry?
It's a good day. How are you?
I'm doing well. Can I just call you Terry? Is it Dr. Terry?
You call me late for dinner.
Okay. Is it Dr. Terry? You said you were a lawyer.
No. I'm
not just
an
assuming.
adjunct professor, but nothing that exalted.
Okay. So Terry Thiele, why? How about this? Why are you here?
Fair enough.
Yeah.
I spent probably 50 years, give or take a year, doing stuff around planning, either with the government. I worked in the intelligence community during the Cold War, or with large corporations like General Electric and AB Electrolux, and I spent 20 years with a specialty chemical company, Lubrizol. And during all of that time, I was observing certain behavioral patterns among the people I was working for. And it got to the point where my thinking on this finally crystallized, and I had sort of an epiphany moment a couple of years ago when it all kind of came together, and I came to the conclusion that as a species, we're in trouble.
Yeah.
And so I figured I'd write that down and hopefully get a couple of people to pay attention to it.
So by in trouble, what do you mean? What do you mean as a species as a whole? Why
Right.
are we in trouble in your eyes? I mean, you could take that in a million different directions, but I'm curious about your perspective on that.
Right. Let me back up and argue. The book's title is Our Fourth Age, and I would argue at the beginning of the fourth age. We've already, as a species, lived through three.
Right. We didn't mention the book really, but you wrote a book.
Yeah, we'll get there.
Right. Yeah. That's why you're here.
The first age, I'd argue, is from about 200,000 years ago, when anatomically modern humans appeared, to about 12,000 years ago. In that first age, we were hunter-gatherers. Second age, from about 12,000 years ago, 10,000 BC, thereabouts, to, I'll say 1785, pick a date, we were farmers and herders. 1785 was more or less the point when commercially available, reliable steam engines showed up. And from 1785 up until, and I picked the start of the COVID epidemic, 2020, that third age, we made things. We were manufacturers.
Mm-hmm.
Go back to that first age, though. I would argue 200,000 years ago, as hunter-gatherers living on the African savanna, we developed a set of instincts in order to survive and pass on our genes.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll dumb it down. For me, I dumbed it down to four basic instincts. The first of which is we're afraid of everything because everything back then was trying to eat us.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we are fearful, we tend to overreact violently to defend ourselves. Secondly, we discovered that we had a better chance of surviving, finding a mate, and passing on our genes if we lived in groups. So we are intensely social animals. And when you think back 200,000 years and earlier, we would spend roughly a third of every day picking the fleas out of our neighbor's hair, socializing. Well, we're not picking the fleas anymore, but we still spend about a third of every day in social engagements. And that's part of the reason why COVID was such a disaster for young people, because they couldn't socialize. And that's a critical instinctive thing that we do. Thirdly, within the groups that we belong, those social groups, we will do anything to improve our status, because you've got a better chance to survive, get a chance to get a better mate, and a better chance to pass on your genes. And by anything, I mean, we'll kill other human beings. We'll do just about anything to improve our status in a group. And in fact, within a group, one of the biggest issues is groupthink. So the boss at the top says, we're going to paint the roses red. And everybody goes, yes, sir, we're going to paint the roses red, because that's how you stay in that group. And it's what was described in 1984 by George Orwell. Fourth and finally, we're curious. And curiosity is not necessarily some altruistic, I look to the stars sort of thing. It's really more a case of, I'm curious as to what's over the hill, and I want to understand what's over the hill before it eats me. So those four things drive us and have driven us and our behavior through those three ages. And you can see them play out in the groups that we form and how groups fight with groups and what people do. What's different, and why I think the future is fraught with peril, is over that time period, I would argue that the rate and degree of change has gradually increased. Now, by that, I mean, if I took a hunter-gatherer from 200,000 years ago and I brought him up to a hunter-gatherer 15,000 years ago, they probably fit right in. The stone tools might look a little different, but there wouldn't have been that much difference.
Right.
And a farmer from, let's say, 5,000 BC to a farmer in 5,000 AD, maybe the clothes are different, but the tools are the same. It's roughly the same thing. They wouldn't have looked that different. Change really started picking up at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. So if we took Benjamin Franklin and brought him forward to today, his head would probably explode, just given he couldn't imagine the world that we live in, the technology we have. And I would argue that that rate of change is accelerating as we speak, to the point where, for the first time in the history of the species, children heretofore could look at their parents and their grandparents and say, my life is going to look something like their lives. Fashion may be different, but it's going to look basically the same. I don't think that's true. I don't think my grandchildren, there isn't anything about my life, how I was raised in the 50s and the 60s, and the life I knew. There's nothing I can tell my grandchildren that's going to help them in the future that they're going to live in, because it's going to be so different.
You don't think that, you mentioned that on the phone when we initially spoke. You don't think that there's still some fundamental things that can be applied? I mean, I feel like there's always that there's fundamental aspects to being a human. There's fundamental
Instincts.
things. There's like, and I mean, if you're, I don't know, if you give it enough thought, you can learn what those things are, like just from yourself. And you can learn how to apply those things in life. Like I'm trying to think of an example, but just kind of being a certain way as a person. Like I'm not saying there's a necessarily like right way to live, but I'm saying there's certain fundamentals that you can instill in people that I think work kind of universally. It's kind of the reason that, you know, don't kill each other, basically.
I agree up to a point, but coping with change when change is so dramatic is frightening.
Mm-hmm.
And when you can't see what the future is going to look like, heretofore anybody could say, I've got a vision of what the future is going to look like. You know, I may have learned from my parents to wash behind my ears and do whatever, but I can see the larger scale of what kind of job I'm going to have, what my family's going to look like, where I'm going to live, and all of that sort of stuff. I would argue, and it's the genesis of the book, is that the future is going to look so different that our ability to adapt to it is going to be challenged. And let me give you a brief description of the sort of changes I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Societal changes. For the first time ever, more people live in cities than in the country. When people move to cities, they stop having kids because you don't need farmhands. When you look at population numbers, Eastern Europe, Japan, South Korea are all forecast to lose about 40% of their population. Their demographic pyramids are inverted. That is, too few young people, too many old people. 95% of the UN's population growth forecast to the end of the century, 95% of that is all going to take place in Africa. Some of those countries are going to grow by 500%. So whether you're looking dramatic population reduction or dramatic population increase, both of them are destabilizing. Layer on top of that, in China and in India, those two countries in particular, one for legal reasons and the other for cultural reasons, encouraged one-child policies for a whole generation. Mm-hmm. And as a result, there are now, what was the number? 20 million Chinese men for which there are no Chinese women. There's like 80 million Indian men for which there are no Indian women. And that means two things. One, there's an awful lot of testosterone out there that's unrequited, okay? And it secondly means that the ability of the population that exists to reproduce is reduced because there aren't enough childbearing women to go along with the men.
Right.
So those two populations in different times, but Chinese population is already decreasing and they're getting older. The Indian population won't do that for a couple decades, but it will eventually do that as well. Talk technology. All of our economics, all of our politics, all of our environmental thinking around climate change is all predicated upon the assumption that the future is going to look like the past when it comes to our basic economic model, which is 20th century Henry Ford mass production. Mm-hmm. But when you take the consequences of 3D printing, artificial intelligence, the internet, nanotechnology, biological engineering, cheap, ubiquitous off-grid energy. That's just a couple of the dramatic technological innovations that are all coming to commercialization at the exact same time. I would argue that we're going from a world of where relatively few each make millions to a world of where millions make relatively few. That is local, customized production by people that no longer have to deal with the economic criteria that applied in the 20th century. Inventory is gone. My book is a great example. I was originally, when I was writing this thing, I thought, I will go get an agent. My agent will go get a publisher, and Random House or Valentine or somebody will publish my book. I rapidly discovered that agents really are more interested in authors who have already published or who have a large social media following, neither of which I have. But I had a mentor, a marketing guy, who led me through the self-publishing process. And I came to the discovery that I want to say 60%, 70% of all books published today are self-published. They're not through the publishing houses. So I went to Amazon, and Amazon prints my books. Now, what's novel is that it's not like I had to buy a couple hundred copies and it sits in a warehouse. Amazon doesn't print that book until somebody orders it. So what that means for production of anything, when you think about it, with 3D printing and the ability to customize with software design, is economies of scale and inventory and all of the sort of mantra words used to describe classic economic behavior. They don't apply to the future. It's a different economic model.
Look, I'm stupid. All right. I'm a dum-dum. I'm a photographer by trade. I'm an artist. Books aren't my thing. All right. I say all that to say, I don't see the problem. Not to say there isn't one. I'm just like, as far as that thing goes, I guess my question is,
here's the problem.
Yeah.
Here's the problem.
What's the issue there?
The way we do decision making, psychologists call it the DIKW model: data, information, knowledge, wisdom. Data is all the raw bits of facts floating around out there. And when you have a particular issue or question or a problem, you go into that stream of data and you pull out the little bits that are applicable to what you're trying to answer. That pile becomes information. You analyze the information and you figure out how to do something. That becomes knowledge. Business managers, virtually all business managers, are knowledge managers. They know how to do something. But the difference between knowledge and wisdom is knowing what to do and what not to do, being able to discriminate among choices. So the problem with business, and this goes back to my frustration at the front end with everybody that I've been working with for the past 50 years, is managers do what they know how to do. They never take the time to say, should I be doing that? Or should I be doing something else? It's if you will, the military example from World War II is battleships. Everybody has to have battleships, and nobody was thinking about the implications of aircraft. And all of a sudden, it became pretty obvious that airplanes made battleships obsolete. And we're watching how anti-tank missiles may be making tanks obsolete. but the point is, you need wisdom to deal with this, what to do and what not to do, as opposed to simply, I'm going to continue to do what I know. Okay. Well, now let's go back to all of this disruptive change in technology. I'm going to cite a Swedish, I believe he was a doctor, Hans Rosling, passed away, unfortunately, a few years ago, wrote a book called Factfulness. And what Rosling had done is he went around the world, 17 countries, 12,000 people, and surveyed them with 13 questions, with 3 answers for each, A, B, or C. These questions weren't about anything. I mean, this was about the state of health in the world, women's education, inoculation rates, poverty rates, sort of the basic core information that you would think that our policy elites, the people at the top of our pyramids, would have to know in order to make decisions about where we're going to go in the future. What Rosling discovered was that the average score was less than 24% getting it right. That the people at Davos had a view of the world, their knowledge was wrong because they were looking at the wrong data. So if you think about the people that are making the decisions for us as to where we should go and how our economics should be and what our politics should be and what have you, without passing judgment on one or the other, if they're making them on the wrong set of facts, they're not going to get the right answers. And if the amount of data is increasing exponentially, so that process, that data pool that I'm pulling stuff from is now all of a sudden a fire hose. And how do I get a teacup out of that fire hose to then figure out how to do things, to figure out what to do? It's becoming a lot more complex.
So basically, things are changing so fast, it's hard to know what to do next.
Yes.
Based on, because you can't use your prior knowledge, your prior wisdom, because knowledge and because the new information is coming so fast, you can't use what you just learned to deal with this new thing. I got what you're saying.
And it's like the old saw that, how many times have I heard where they say, people that are in college looking at different careers, that how many of the different careers that you're looking at will be obsolete before you get out of college,
right?
Because things are changing so fast. The point in it all, though, is unless you have the awareness that this is the case, we don't have a hope of being able to step back and go, okay, let's approach this in a different way. Let's think about this without just blindly assuming that we know what the hell we're doing.
Some people in this new situation that you're painting for us, some people are going to thrive. I would argue that internet age people who work in internet, because they're so used to quick, fast change, changing trends, changing, this particular type of picture is going to get more likes. This is going to get more views. This is going to get in more people's faces. Those types of people, not necessarily the ones that work in those industries, but the people who can adapt to that change like that. It takes a specific set of something in your brain that makes a person be able to do that.
Well, and I would argue it's generational. I'm a boomer,
so?
okay? And so any technology that I know, I had to learn, and I'm not good at it.
Well, what I was getting at, but real quick, I know what you're saying, but what I was getting at is I think that there's something in certain people, not necessarily like someone who is like yourself, like you said, a boomer. I'm sure there's somebody out there who I get that. I mean, like I'll get behind on certain technology, certain apps, certain things sometimes. I'm not. I'm a young guy. I'm 27, and it's hard for me to keep up sometimes. So I get that like falling back on it is hard, but I think I don't know. I just think certain people are better at adapting quickly than others, and
Yes.
and
But I would
maybe it
argue it's
is.
generational. I would
Okay.
argue that
Okay.
young people, Gen Zs, were born into technology. They were born into a rate of change that I never would have experienced. I mean, when my wife Carol takes her cell phone and she can't get the cell phone so that the picture, it won't line up. How do I get the thing?
Uh,
And she hands it to a 6-year-old granddaughter who goes, boop, 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 boop. There you are, Nama, and fixes her phone for her. The irony for me, the reversal here is historically wisdom, older people like,
oh,
me, were perceived to be wise
I see.
because we had lived through experiences and had failed enough that and survived to be able to, don't eat those berries, those are those will kill you. Don't eat the berry.
Yeah.
Today, I think it's in a way flipping because the young people are comfortable, your generation and younger, are comfortable with change and technology in a way that my generation, I mean, we're sitting in the back of the car screaming our heads out while you're driving it forward. So if there's a hope for the future, it's that the adaptability of young people can cope with that rate of change that
Yeah.
my generation can't.
I think there's going to be some stuff that's going to drop off. There's going to be some cons to this thing, but I think that we'll continue to adapt. I think that it is generational, but I think it's only generational just due to the situation that people are thrown in. Like our brains at a young age are super plastic. Like they're super stretchy. They can do whatever. So if you throw somebody with a fresh, new, hot brain off the press, into a situation where every day they're seeing new things and they're having to adapt to this new change every hour, and that's all they know, then of course it's going to be easier for them to do that than it is for someone like me or you who aren't, 5, but I think that in this new age of, the internet's not going anywhere. It's like it feels like an out of control car most of the time.
Yeah.
I don't know if it is, but it feels like it is. And I think that we'll continue to adapt and like just become accustomed to this is how we do things. And we'll be fine there.
The good news is that younger people are more adaptable. The bad news is that you go back to all of those pyramids of groups, social groups, political groups, economic groups that we all love to join because that's what human beings do. Invariably, you look at those pyramids, be it business, politics, military, whatever, who's sitting at the top of those pyramids? Old people.
Mm-hmm.
And so the challenge, and then you got groupthink within each of those pyramids. If you don't do what the group thinks, then you're a heretic. Mm-hmm. You're not allowed in the group anymore.
Right.
And so the challenge is how can younger people who tend to be lower in the pyramid simply because they haven't had the experience, their genius, their adaptability is the salvation, but they're not necessarily in charge.
I, as one of those people who cannot stand the old way of doing things for the most part, I am one of those people who I was that teenager who was like, if so and so, like if this company doesn't want me to have tattoos, and I don't want to work there, like you can see how that worked out. Like, I'm fine. And what I'm saying is, usually those people just don't work at those places. Like they figure it out. They make their own way. They do their own thing. They change the way it's done. I would argue that's what we're doing.
We're
we're changing the way things are done.
Companies making millions to a million companies making a few.
Look at that. It's almost like I understand what you're talking about. Yeah.
It's that, and that's the transition. I give you a case in point. Climate change,
Mhm.
okay? Sustainability. And everybody's concerned about climate change. Okay. But unfortunately, most of the rhetoric, most of the environmental thinkers, most of the government policies are predicated upon the assumption that climate change is caused by an
Yes.
economic model that Henry Ford started of mass production. So if I have a huge factory and I've got smokestacks and drain pipes that I can measure, and I can measure the inputs and the outputs, and I can say what the carbon footprint is, and I can do all of that stuff for that factory,
Mhm.
now I'm going to set policies and what have you, assuming that that's the problem. But if the problem isn't one large factory, but hundreds, thousands of people creating product with 3D printers using software and new materials or nanotech on their kitchen tables, what's the environmental footprint of that economic activity? And again, if I'm looking at the problem as being caused by huge factories, when the future isn't huge factories, I am creating a solution for the wrong problem.
So you think we're looking in the wrong place.
Yeah.
We're looking at the wrong problem.
It
It's
goes
the
back to
same problem we're looking
Rosling's.
at. Okay.
It's Rosling's survey results that demonstrated that the people in charge have the facts wrong.
That's interesting.
I'm gonna just quick quote from Rosling.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, I'm gonna quick read this. I've tested audiences from all around the world and from all walks of life: medical students, teachers, university lecturers, eminent scientists, investment bankers, executives in multinational companies, journalists, activists, senior politicians. Most of them also get most of the answers wrong. Some even score worse than the general public. A few of the most appalling results came from Nobel laureates and medical researchers. By the law of averages, even a troop of chimps would score 33% on each of three answer question, or 4 out of the first 12 in the whole test. What's more, the chimps' errors would have been equally shared between the two wrong answers, whereas human errors all tend to be in one direction. Almost everyone thinks the world is more frightening, more violent, and more hopeless than it really is. So those are the people at the top of the pyramids, my generation, who don't have the facts right. And it's changing so fast, and they don't appreciate it. The people that get it are your age and younger, because they grew up with it. It was, and again, I go back to the point that I can't tell my grandchildren anything useful about that, living with that rate of change. It scares me. It's comfortable for them, but it scares me. Now, I can tell them how to brush their teeth and stuff like that, but I can't tell them how to adapt or cope in a way that they're going to have to. My daughter-in-law, in the book, I mentioned this example. Last summer before, they were watching Christmas in July, and they were watching Macaulay Culkin on Home Alone. And he's sitting there watching a 1930s era a gangster movie on a VHS player. And one of my grandkids looks to mom and says, "What's that machine?" And she said, "Well, that's a VHS tape player." And, well, how's it work? She says, "Well, you would go to the store, and they would have these big long shelves filled with these little boxes with cassettes in them. And for a given movie, there might be like 10 or 20 of these little boxes, and they'd have all of these movies all over the place. And you'd take the movie you wanted to watch, and you'd take it up, and you'd rent it and take it home, and you'd put it in a machine, and that would play. And then after you were done, you'd have another machine. You could take it out to rewind it, and then you had to take it back to the store. Now, kids, all they know is Netflix.
Right.
And my grandson just turned teenager, so he's a little on the snotty side, but he looks at her and he goes, "How did you live like that?" You know,
A lot slower.
Yeah, well, just his view of the rate of change in the world is something that I can't comprehend.
Right.
So the challenge is whether you can get people at the bottom of the pyramid to survive the bad decisions that the people at the top of the pyramids are making.
I see what I mean, it's like what you're saying is an entire generation is about to have to come up with no help really quickly.
Well, not only that, not only no help, but the wrong answers, the wrong decisions, doing the wrong things.
I think
they're going to fix it.
Yeah. I think that part will get. I think they'll figure that out. Like the whole. I mean, by figure it out, I think we'll look really quick and realize, okay, like this way of doing things, because things are changing so fast. By the time the people who are in my generation and younger get up to midway, like they're working their way to the top, things are changing so fast, we're already going to know that's not going to work. Like the way that they were doing that, we already know that's not going to work. So we have to figure out how to make this. How do you build a company in 2035? Like, how do you do this?
Getting the facts right, starting with the right data. You know, I keep going back to demographics. Everybody's concerned. For years, I remember the original Star Trek TV series had one of the episodes was about overpopulation. And Captain Kirk had to infect some woman with a disease so she could go back to her planet and allow everybody to catch the disease so they could die and deal with population.
That sounds
yeah,
pretty
right.
dark. Wow.
Well, if you actually look at the data, there are quite a few demographic experts who are arguing that since people around the world are now urban dwellers, not rural dwellers, and women in cities don't have babies at the same rate. So you look at the birth rates and they're dropping. We are and people, we're going to go up to 15 billion people. Well, some of these demographic experts say within our lifetime, within the next 20 years, we're going to top out at maybe 8.5 billion. And then the population of the world is going to start going down.
I was about to say, I mean, that's not a bad thing. Like what you were talking about earlier.
Once it starts going down, it doesn't stop.
Oh, it keeps going. How far are we going?
It keeps going. Well, you don't really, we don't know yet. But the point is, nobody's thinking about that problem. They're thinking about overpopulation. They're thinking about the wrong problem. It's the exact opposite. If you want to see what a developed world country with low population, look at Japan. Their pyramids like this. They don't have kids. And it's a bunch of old people. So there's not enough young people to work to pay for the care for the old people. And then it gets destabilizing. So in China, they don't have any social safety nets like in the West. Their traditional model was that the children take care of the parents and the grandparents. Well, with a one-child policy, you have one kid to take care of two parents. You don't have necessarily couples. So their pyramids like this, and they don't have a safety net for a lot of old people. There's a lot of political destabilization that we're about to go through in different countries in different ways because people aren't paying attention to what the actual facts are. I mean, one of the reasons why, one of the reasons why Russia is doing what it is doing at the moment is because the Russian demographics, Russia's going to run out of military age men. They're already going like that. And their largest pool of military age men is right now, and then it starts shrinking. They're going to lose 14% of their population. And if they can't populate the military, they can't project power.
Right. So in your head, in your thoughts, when does all this start to when do things start to to collapse? Is there a trigger point? Is there a
Well, I think it's already happening. Look at our politics. Look at Brexit in England.
Mm-hmm.
Look at Trump in the United States. Now, I'm not going to play politics and take sides. I'm simply observing that Mr. Trump was the consequence of a transition that's taken place. And in my simple way of saying it, post-World War II, the United States made the world safe for global trade, thanks to the United States Navy. So for the first time ever, people could trade with anybody else anywhere. What happened at that point was voters in Western democracies. This world is so complex and all of this stuff is going on. We need, technical people to take care of all. I don't get this. I don't understand. Tell you what, you're the politician. I'm the voter. I'm going to make a deal with you. I'm going to give you my vote if you do 4 things for me. I want you to make sure I have a job so I can feed my family.
Mm-hmm.
I want my family to be safe. I'd like my kids to have a future, please. And when I'm not bothering anybody else, I'd like you to leave me alone. Now, I would argue that our ruling elites in the West, Republican, Democrat, liberal, Tory, they're all of them.
Mm-hmm.
Since the end of the Second World War, gradually, what you've seen happen is jobs go where the economics dictate, and the economics dictated they went from high-cost developed world to low-cost developing world, which is why everything now, up until now, has been just recently manufactured in China.
Mm-hmm.
Politicians didn't deliver on those 4 things for voters. And that's why you had Brexit. That's why you're seeing the French election that's about to take place is that same tension. And Mr. Trump was the manifestation of voters saying, nobody's been listening to me for the past generation. I'm going to light my torch, grab my pitchfork, and we're just going to burn the place down. And we're going to try this guy. He's not a politician. Yeah. But we've been getting all these politicians, and nobody is taking care of these 4 things for us.
Yeah.
And so, what's a lot of it has to do with these demographic and technological changes that are just now beginning to take off. And you're seeing it in our politics. You're seeing it in our social, issues that are just wrenching the country at the moment. Because younger people and older people aren't talking the same language, and we're going through those transitions right now. I mean, you look at our elected officials, Mr. Biden, Ms. Pelosi, are both aged. I mean, they're both elderly. You look at the data for the Senate and the House and the number of people that are in their 60s, 70s, and 80s. And again, they don't have the facts right. They're not looking at the world the way it really is.
Right. Where's the hope at? Like
young people.
Just hoping they figure it out.
Yeah, if we can survive long enough for the pyramids to migrate up, because instinctively we're not going to change. I just don't see how you divorce yourself from these. It's biological. It's baked into us. This is the way we act.
I think, as far as technologically and whatnot, as far as like social media and I don't know how, but I think we're gonna take a step backwards. I think there's gonna be a deliberate step backwards. Not in a way somebody's gonna figure out how to do it without losing a ton of money, like without all these companies having to lose a ton of money, because nobody thought that this was gonna get to where it is. No one No one was like, you know, Facebook is going to be like being on your front porch in a neighborhood full of 50 people. Like you're just kind of hanging out talking to everybody. That's kind of what Facebook is like, but not at all, you know? Like it's this weird animal. Like social media has become this weird thing that no one knew what it was going to become. No one could have predicted that it was going to become this. And all these platforms that we're constantly on, whether it's Netflix or YouTube or Facebook or Instagram, Twitter, Snapchat, anything, TikTok is a great one. They're all just designed to keep you on them, like to sell ads and, you know, just to make money. And I get that. Like, I'm not going to fault you for that because I get it. That's what you want. But it's tapping into something that that's just a part of us that we can't control. You know, it's hard for us to control. It's tapping into our addictive tendencies, our pleasure centers. Like it's in there.
And it's creating different groups where heretofore your groups that you joined as a Homo sapien, you know, whatever, would be limited by geography more than anything else. You know, so if you were in North America, you belonged to a North American group, and if you were in the rural part of North America, it was a rural North American group. But I think what we're seeing now, because of the ability to communicate instantaneously with everyone in the world, the interaction of people in urban areas, from one urban area to another urban area, there's more commonality between a New Yorker and a Londoner and a Parisian in how they view the world and how they think than there is between a New Yorker and an upstate New Yorker. So rather than having sort of vertical pyramids, you're now getting, if you will, horizontal groupings. And to your point, all of those communication tools enable, accelerate, amplify that, if you will, communication binding across borders and continents. So it's a different way of organizing than we've ever seen before.
Yeah, the point I was getting at is, although it's a great way to connect and it's, you know, it's good in many ways, it's really dangerous and it's really not good for a lot of people. Some people can't control it. Like I'll catch myself scrolling just endlessly sometimes, but I'm not one of those people who will be on TikTok or Facebook or whatever for hours. That's not.
If I walked out of the house and I don't have this in my hand, I have to go back to the house because I feel naked.
Right. And that I don't think is going to change. I don't know that that's going to change because it is kind of a part of us now. And I don't know what the step backwards is, but it's going to happen. Either that or we all die. I'm not sure. Like, well, you know,
you sound, now you're sounding pessimistic.
No, it's just, I think, I don't know. It's,
well, here's the bottom line. We're looking at a future that is chaotic. It's not predictable, not in the way it was predictable for any previous generations. You go back 100 years and the kids could predict, generally speaking, what their future would look like. I don't think that holds today. So when you're a human being in a chaotic environment, you get scared. You get fearful. And as a species, when we're afraid, we overreact violently. We lash out.
So do you think that this is going to cause mass, maybe spread over the next, I don't know, a few decades, just like you think it's going to cause a lot of violence in the future? Like, well,
certainly conflict, and it doesn't necessarily have to be military conflict, although I think that's altogether likely.
And maybe,
but, again, our societal conflict, you know, the screaming and the yelling that we do on a daily basis among ourselves, at each other, because you don't agree with what I think, so you're not in my group, and your group scares my group, and so I'm going to violently overreact whatever you just said. That, I think, is something that we are going to be experiencing for the foreseeable future. Now, as far as physical conflict, well, we got a hot war now. I have to tell you, it for me, it's deja vu all over again. I was in the intelligence community during the 80s. I was a minor Cold Warrior. And what I'm reading and what I'm seeing, first of all, back in the 80s, you would never have been able to read and see in real time what we're reading and seeing now, what's going on in Ukraine. So again, that instantaneous feedback loop is there. And it's like, boy, I've seen this before. And I keep catching myself saying Soviets rather than Russians. It's, and when political leaders are afraid because they see change, and I think that's what's happening in Russia, Russian leaders feel threatened, and they don't know how to react to it. And so we've got Ukraine, and I could see more of the same. And again, think about Africa, where all of their political boundaries were drawn by European powers at the beginning of the end of the 19th century. So they don't line up with tribal or familial alignments. So right off, they're screwed. And then you look at these population increases. So their pyramids look like that as opposed to that. And all of these young people, millions of young people in Africa that have very shaky political institutions and don't have strong societal bounds as nations. You want to talk about conflict? I check that box.
So, due to multiple countries with very large populations not having a lot of children, population's going to drop off pretty heavily in the next few decades, few years. You're saying, and those young people aren't really. Well, we're hoping they're going to figure it out. They're going to figure out how to navigate doing all that stuff being, living, and maintaining the country, maintaining businesses throughout constant, instantaneous change. We're just hoping they can figure that out.
Unfortunately, I don't think there's going to be a uniform answer all around the world.
Right. Of course not.
In the book, I'm a scenario planner. I do strategy work. That's what I've done for decades.
Okay.
And so there are scenarios towards the end of the book of what that future might look like, both economically and societal scenarios. And I think it's going to be case dependent. I think interestingly enough, the countries that are probably going to be the least disrupted are the Anglo-Saxon countries: United States, Canada, United Kingdom, Australia, New Zealand.
Why is that?
Because their birth rates are close to maintaining. They're close to the 1.2? Well, however many kids you need to repopulate. They're closer than the rest of the world. And on top of that, those are the countries where everybody wants to immigrate. So people are leaving. Not only are the other countries with lousy birth rates, but for reasons of, bad politics or whatever, like the Russian, the educated young Russian people all left Russia last month. They're trying to go someplace else.
Right.
So the Anglo-Saxon countries, if you talk to demographics experts, those are the ones that are probably going to be least destabilized. But you think about Africa, you think about China in terms of instability. Russia, which is really a polyglot of different smaller regions that have been welded together, the destabilization is going to be a lot worse. So is there going to be violence, conflict? Maybe, but I don't think it's going to be everywhere all the time. It's going to be case dependent. And it then depends upon whether certain countries have enough young people, and they don't necessarily, I mean, when I'm saying educated, I don't mean formally educated, but young people that are aware, that are thoughtful, that can steer through this. There's one author, Peter Zeihan, who wrote a book that I mentioned, The Accidental Superpower, about the United States. And his view of the future is that the rest of the world is screwed. But the United States is big enough by itself that we can be our own world. I mean, we can generate just about everything we need between the Atlantic and the Pacific. And if you combine Canada and Mexico, we don't need the rest of the world to survive. We're seeing right now sort of the death of globalization. Zeihan's view, though, is other parts of the world, for demographic reasons, for geopolitical reasons, are looking at a world of hurt. Now, he doesn't talk about the technological disruptions the way I do. But I think our two views of the world are similar.
Because, what did you just say? You said, sorry, I lost it. Bless. You said, I had something in my head. Terry, what were you saying?
I said a lot of things.
No, it was literally like seconds ago. Crap.
In terms of the North America.
Oh, I got it. You said that other countries will be okay. If things kind of go south, we can do our own thing here. But we've been doing things, we've been outsourcing, jobs for so long at this point, and our economy is so just kind of stuck in that way. Like, we've been doing that for a hot minute now.
But it's shifting. If you look at the trends in terms of manufacturing is coming back into the States because businesses are beginning to recognize that they can't trust global trade to get them the parts they need. Now, we're going to go through some dislocation rebuilding manufacturing, but it's happening. And again, it's not going to be Henry Ford 20th century mass production. We've got thousands, it's the whole maker movement. We have thousands of young people who are utilizing these disruptive technologies to approach business in an entirely different way. I have an app on my phone. I don't remember the name of the business, but basically what I can do is I can take my phone, put it on the floor, turn on the camera, and I'll stand there and I'll go around in a circle like this. And the phone is going to take my measurements. And then that site shows me pages of different clothes that I could order, suits. Because I'm a boomer, I still wear suits.
Yeah.
And I can get a bespoke suit that I order online through that app that will fit me better than the one I get at the tailor shop. I can go online and order customized shampoo. I can take a little quiz about my hairstyle and what I want it to be like and so forth and so on. And they'll mix me up my own very own shampoo with my name on the bottle and send it to me.
And you think that's where everything's headed? You think just about everything's headed that way?
Well, okay, here's the William Gibson quote. The future's already here, it's just unevenly distributed. So
I like
in
that.
some cases it's faster and in some cases it's slower.
Mm-hmm.
Am I going to be manufacturing my own automobile anytime soon? Probably not. But can I get my automobile customized?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you couldn't have done that a decade ago.
No.
So that shift towards custom production and the capacity of technology to enable it without economies of scale. And I can communicate with anybody world. It's local production, but hell, I can sell it to somebody in England. You want a particular Wupperman made. I get my 3D printer. I'll make a Wupperman for you in the color you want and the size you want. And that customization of manufacturing is the antithesis of Henry Ford mass production. And I do think that's what technology enables in a way that we had never. They're 3D printing food.
Are they?
Meat.
Who's 3D printing? Who? I haven't heard
There's
of this.
a Israeli company, and there's also one in France. It's in the book, where they're basically taking cells from a cow,
Mm-hmm.
and they create a culture,
Mm-hmm.
and they grow meat
Yeah.
cells in a culture, and then they drive it through a 3D printer. They have three different cultures, so you can get the meat plus the fat and the sinew, so that it actually now is it look exactly like a steak? Not yet.
I didn't realize. I know what you're talking about. I didn't realize it was 3D printed.
It's getting there.
And I've heard it hasn't. I've heard it doesn't taste very good.
Not yet. Not yet. But the point is,
if
that's the trend line.
I don't think that's a bad thing, though.
No,
not at all. That's a
no. But again,
that would be great.
Let's get back to sustainability. Cows are horrible because of they give off all the gas. Well, what if you get to the point where you really don't need all of those cows anymore? You've got a different set of environmental issues, not the ones you're looking at the wrong issue. Technology is solving problems. There's a group of environmentalists, and I'm blanking on their name, but basically what this group is to sort of counter the traditional environmental groups that we've had, who say, technology is bad, and manufacturing is bad, and growth is bad, and we can't all have everything. We have to share and live in sackcloth. And these people are saying technology isn't the problem, it's the solution. And how we choose to use technology in the future to address our problems is the way we get to a manageable future. And oh, by the way, if populations are decreasing, not only do I not have the manufacturing environmental issues, I don't have the population environmental issues. So let's right size the discussion around what the actual facts are, not what you think the facts are.
That's a lot. That is a lot.
Yeah.
That's a lot. How long did it
That's
take
why
you
it took me 50 years to
I was about to say, how long did it take you to put this thing together?
It was a good year's worth of writing.
Yeah.
And I'll be honest, as I was going through it, every time I turn a page and a new topic or an idea came up, I realized how stupid I was because I had to go research it. So most of what is in the book, well, virtually everything that's in the book, isn't any critical novel thinking on my part. I'm just collecting everybody else's brilliance and trying to create,
make something out of
if
it. You're
each of
trying
these is a tile, I'm trying to make a mosaic.
Yeah. I see.
And then the picture emerges. And I'm not saying anything profound. It's just you just put it all out there. If you get it all on the table and look at it, this is kind of where it's heading.
Are you worried about it? You don't really seem like you are.
Grandchildren. and I am worried about the near term.
Hmm.
I think we are looking at a period of instability and conflict over the next 10 to 20 years. But I do have, well, I'll demonstrate. I have hope that we'll get through that and find our way into a different future. And in fact, I'm already working on The Fifth Age, which is a book about when we start populating beyond Earth, when as a species we branch out into the solar system, and what that will do to us, or what that will mean for us as a species. So for me to be writing that book, I have to think we're going to get there to the fifth age, which means we survive the fourth age.
Yeah, I think we will. I don't know if we're gonna. I used to think that we were gonna leave, here, this planet. If we did, I used to think it would be because we had destroyed this one. But
No,
I'm
I
starting
think
to.
we will follow a pattern that, as a species, we've already followed. When you think about, and I'll use one of the most obvious example, which is the discovery of the New World, which no one realized existed until Leif Erikson stumbled across it. And over time, what we did is we went through a process of discovery, and then exploration, and then exploitation, and then colonization. And then after that, what I'll call consolidation, when a number of the new colonies sort of came together, and then rebellion. So that is a pattern that we've already seen humans play out.
Mm-hmm.
And we're doing it for greed. We'll go out and we'll exploit it, and and then we'll colonize it, and then we'll get into fights. And so I could see that pattern playing out, and that's what I'm trying to flesh out in the fifth age.
I think by the time we get to a point where we can leave, I'm hoping that whoever's in charge of that, or whoever is on that, at the forefront of that, has enough wisdom about them that they can. I don't know. Like, I feel like we're past the point. Like, hey, look, we all understand what happened back when, civilization started branching out, and we were just kind of fighting everybody because we didn't get it. Like, we couldn't see the bigger picture like we can see now. We're looking back and we're like, we were fighting because we found this, piece of land and someone else was on it or whatever. I would like to think that we're far enough along now as a civilization, as a species, that we can do that without fighting.
That's the hope. But I'll mention recent research which speaks to, historically, psychologists, psychiatrists would talk about, we've got two brains.
Mm-hmm.
We've got the front brain, the modern brain. We have this back lizard primitive brain.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Ooh. And the thought was the modern brain evolved in order to keep that primitive brain under control, the one that overreacts violently
Mm-hmm.
and does all of those other bad things, that instinctive brain.
Right.
Well, more recent research suggests that, in fact, the role of the modern brain is not to control the primitive brain. Rather, the role of the modern brain is to come up with a persuasive story to tell your group about why you're going to do what your primitive brain wants you to do.
Yeah. Yeah. That's pretty.
Think
yeah, that
about
sounds right.
how groups behave when different groups are confronting the same information, and they analyze it to generate knowledge. two different groups looking at the same facts will come up with two diametrically opposing conclusions as to what the right course of behavior is.
And the right course obviously lines up with whatever their interests are.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
damn it.
The question is, can we ever, our instincts enabled us to survive as far as we've gotten. Are they going to help us or kill us in that future when we expand out? Because we're not all going to leave the planet.
No.
But we're now going to have populations in different places that don't have anything in common with each other anymore. If you think,
yeah, well, I don't know. So let's say we colonize Mars. Let's say that happens. I would argue, as a matter of fact, I'm going to say I 100% guarantee you that there would be as much of a cultural difference between somebody who lives on Mars and someone who lives in Greenville, North Carolina, where I am. I would say there's as much of a cultural difference between me and them as there is between me and someone who lives in Burbank, California. Because
perhaps
I think at that point they'll have the same access to the same entertainment, the same things going on, and like we'll have TV shows coming from Mars. We'll know who celebrities are on Mars. They'll know who celebrities are here, because if we colonized Mars, we have satellites that are allowing us to communicate pretty close to real time.
Yeah, the question is whether interests align. All I know is that the American colonies fought a revolution, and we were English, okay, and considered ourselves English, and but we had a different economic circumstance and a different set of drivers because our environment was fundamentally different than England, that drove us apart. Over time, it took time, but it did eventually drive us apart. The same happened with the Spanish in Central and South America, between the Spanish colonization of those countries and the eventual revolutions in all of them that separated them from Mother Spain.
Mm-hmm.
So you may be right. I don't. That's exactly what I'm going to research in the next book.
Maybe there's a war.
Once I'm done with it, I'll let you know what the answer is.
There's a Martian war, and it ends with Mars being the next country.
Well, the fascinating thing is there's so much science fiction written already about these what if scenarios. I'm certainly not going to repeat all of that science fiction.
Right.
What I'm trying to look at is, what does it mean to us as a species? Do we change our behavior? Can we change our behavior as a species and behave differently? Or are we captured by our biology and our instincts?
Well, everybody, I lost Terry. We were on the Zoom call, so hang on. What were you saying before my computer hung up on you?
I was just wondering whether or not, and again, that's the gist behind the fifth page, or the next book, I should say, whether we can actually adjust our instincts, whether we have the capacity to do that, so that we no longer overreact violently when we're afraid as a species, and whether we can manage our mania about belonging so that we no longer do things that are evil.
Yeah. It is
simply
crazy
to belong.
It's really, it's interesting to see how far people will go just to stay part of a group.
Well, in the military, think of, I'm a historian, and I'm fascinated by the American Civil War, which was the first modern war in a way. But when you think about men all from a community, because that's how the regiments were formed, they were all local groups. So you knew everybody in your regiment, certainly in your company. They all came from home. So that was clearly a group that you didn't want to disappoint. And if you were outcast from that, you were outcast from everything in your life.
Right.
So you belong to a group of people, and the officer says, okay, everybody line up here. Those guys are up the hill behind a stone wall, and they've got cannons and muskets. I want you guys to march in a line, standing up the hill and beat those guys. And they actually did it.
Mm-hmm.
When you think about the First World War and soldiers who were ordered to go over the top into machine gun fire,
Right.
and they did it. And you wonder what impelled a creature who's got some survival instincts to do that, and this intense desire to belong.
It's community.
Yeah. You do crazy things to stay in your group.
I wasn't even thinking that far. I was thinking like today a good example is, I mean, just pick a topic really. A lot of people, because of their social group, because of the group that they belong to, and because of how they know they'll be perceived, they'll convince themselves that they believe something. That, like, if they actually sat down with themselves and really gave it thought, gave it original thought, gave it, give yourself 30 minutes to really think about this and dive into it, see what you feel, not what everybody else around you feels. Well, I think a lot of people would be surprised, and probably horrified, because they feel like even thinking thoughts that don't agree, that don't line up with your group, that's scary for some people, it's terrifying to even think it, because you're like, what if someone finds out that I just thought that?
And think of religion. The people that are most vilified, religion and sustainability. The people that are most vilified are people who were in the religion and then got out or changed to another one. Mm-hmm. And then if you're a non-believer, fine. But you actually believed and left us, and you're really bad. Mm-hmm. There are a number of environmental thinkers. Again, I'll come back to sustainability. The first leader of Greenpeace got out of the group and basically said, climate change, the only solution to climate change, we've got to change our energy profile. We need nuclear energy. Mm-hmm. And became an advocate for nuclear energy. You want to talk about being vilified? I mean, tarred and feathered and run out of town on a rail, because he had done not only was he outside of the groupthink, but he had been a member and a devotee of the groupthink, and now he was denying it.
Yeah. Is that
that's what humans do. That's what we've always done.
It's so why are we so ready to kick somebody out of the group when they decide they don't believe what we believe?
In the group was absolutely critical. The cohesiveness of that group 200,000 years ago on the savannah to surviving was absolutely critical.
And our instinct is to kick out anybody who is threatening that stability.
Yeah.
Like, all right, man,
interestingly enough, ADHD and autism and dyslexia, mm-hmm. which are considered problems, 200,000 years ago, they weren't problems. First of all, dyslexia didn't exist because we weren't reading. Dyslexia is only an issue when you're trying to read things in an order.
I wonder if it ever did pop up as some other issue. Like,
Well, I mean, all of three of those things were survival traits that benefited the group in different ways. Somebody who was ADHD, couldn't sit still. He was always the one going, I'm going to go see what's over there.
Okay.
Okay, you find that out and let us know.
Yeah.
The autistic guy was, I can't, I'm remembering everything. Okay, so I can tell you, everything about everything just because I'm anal retentive or what have you. Those were survival traits that having one or two of them in the group benefited the group.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Because if they weren't useful tools at one point, it's likely they wouldn't have been passed down.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Holy shit. I never thought about that. Look at that. Look at that. I like that. That's cool. That's cool. I never thought about it's really ADHD is definitely something that I've never been formally diagnosed, but definitely pretty sure I have ADHD.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of common in my generation. I don't know if that's
it's a survival trait.
Yeah. No.
But it was a survival trait that was designed for living on the savannah when you were being chased by lions 200,000 years ago, 300,000 years ago.
I never thought of it as and
again, dyslexia was never an issue until you had written words.
Right. I had a thought while I was talking just then. I'm wondering is ADHD more prevalent like today? Is that? I mean, I guess it is because it's probably being diagnosed more than
I didn't see data on that. I don't know.
Mm. That's something I'm interested in. Anyway, well, Terry, we've covered a lot. You got anything else you want to talk about?
Well, we had talked a bit about, what do I think the future is, and I don't want to be a Debbie Downer and say we're all going to die here.
I mean, well, technically we are.
But I mean, the goal of the book and the reason for having this conversation and hopefully having people listening to it is, I may not be right. I may be wrong in some of the conclusions that I've drawn in the book. The goal of the book is to start an argument, several arguments. And if people start talking about these issues, then as far as I'm concerned, it would have been successful.
You're one step closer to solving them.
That's right. But if you're blind to the fact that you've got a problem, it's the old Secretary Rumsfeld. You know what you know what you don't know, but you don't know what you don't know.
Correct.
And that's where we are with you don't know what you don't know. Yeah. And clearly, Rosling's data indicates that the people at the top of the pyramids don't know what they know.
Well, where can people find your book, Terry?
Amazon. It's Amazon Books.
Made to order. They're made to order. They're bespoke.
Yeah, fresh off the printer.
Right. Yeah, it's still going to be warm when you get it with that Prime
That's
shipping.
Right.
Those 2 days, that 2 day shipping. Well, Terry, you got a website or anything you want to direct anybody to?
No. I'm just gonna say in the back of the book is my email address, and if anybody wants to carry on the conversation, email me.
Would you like to? Well, I'll just ask you that later. Anyway, I was going to ask if you want to put your email down in the description of everything.
TVTHIELE at Fourth Age, FOURTH AGE.com.
What Terry said.
FourthAge.com.
All right. Everything for the book and Terry's email and everything is going to be down in the description. If you want to contact him and chat with him about this stuff, or if you would like to buy the book and give it a read, do so. Terry, thank you for coming on. I appreciate it. It was nice talking to you.
I really enjoyed the conversation.
I'm glad you did, because there were moments there where I was like, boy, I feel like I'm being really, really boring because I don't have a lot to say.
No, actually, you there's nothing worse than monologuing and having no feedback. And you were
I tried to give it what I
poking
could.
me. I appreciate that.
Okay. Well, awesome. Everybody, thank you for hanging in for about an hour and a half. I'm not sure with that break how long it's going to be, but, about an hour and 20 maybe. And make sure you're following Small Stuff Podcast on TikTok, Facebook, Instagram. Again, I think that's all of them. Everything's going to be in the description that I want you to know about, so check that out, and we'll see you later.
Thank you.